approaching 11 hours now of a long day. And forgive me, I want to go back to one of my early senators, Lindsey Graham. I think he asked you something, and I'd like to just put it this way. On a scale from 1 to 10, how deep is your faith? That I want to ask that question.
You're asking me, or
no,
you won't ask me?
I'm just joking.
Okay.
I won't ask you that. But I do want to go through some of the things that some of my colleagues did on Top Line. And forgive me, I don't want to dwell too much, but some of it I found today just to me really didn't hold water. And I want to start with my friend and colleague, Ted Cruz, who is my friend. He's a Texan. One of my favorite Texans is Brene Brown's, who says it's hard to hate up close, so pull people in. And a lot of times in this culture of tribal politics, the reality is we know each other, we get to know each other over years, and I've had the privilege of working with Ted on a lot of really good policy. So I went back to my office and re-listened to his questioning of you about critical race theory, and he referenced your speech, which I hadn't read. You Harvard folks are so well focused on these things, but I read your speech. And I was very surprised. Ted had a very big chart. I think he needs to give Senator Whitehouse some advice on charts. Senator Whitehouse's was very small. It was almost as if they were proportionate to their state sizes.
Easy there, New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, I would request that my colleagues in the Democratic Party would stop interrupting me. But he talked about your speech, and when I read your speech, there's a couple things that jumped out. First of all, he acknowledged it was a very powerful speech, very moving speech about extraordinary black women. I have a criticism. Your mother was not in it, but I will leave that alone. But there's some things he honed in on, almost as if they seemed to be accusations, which don't hold merit to me. We have a saying in New Jersey, I felt it was all hat and no cattle. And so he said that you called the woman who wrote the 1619 Project, that you called her provocative. That's not a compliment necessarily if you call someone provocative, is it?
No.
No, I think Ted Cruz is very provocative, and that doesn't mean I agree with what he's saying, his philosophy. Doesn't mean I agree with his statements. But he pointed out you also called the author acclaimed. She won a Pulitzer Prize, correct?
She did.
In journalism. So she is acclaimed.
She is.
But in nowhere are you heralding her as this is reflective of your philosophy. That's true, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so I don't understand that at all. Part of his chart also was a lot of ellipses, skipping out things, but you mentioned critical race theory when you're talking about policies in general. I actually went back to that talk too, and I saw you threw everything in there. You were talking about psychology, economics, all different types of disciplines as touching upon the law. I think there was everything in there, I seem to be, except for astrology. But you understand that you were just listing a list of things that people could say touch the law. They weren't your philosophies at all.
Correct, Senator. And that speech was not related to what I do as a judge. That was talking about sentencing policy and all of the different academic disciplines that might relate to it.
Yeah, and then finally, we're entering an age that is surprising to me in American society, where lots of books are being banned and lots of talks about books being read. You're on the board of a private school, and you have no supervision or authority over what books the children read in a private school, correct?
Correct.
I really do appreciate that. Jumping really quickly to a lot of talk today about these child exploitation cases. And Senator Durbin, I think that actually Josh Hawley used the word attack when describing his own. So I don't understand what that point of sensitivity was. But I individual cases, and we've now heard about two, you've presided over as a judge more than 10, 15 cases?
I've presided over 14 cases that involve child sex crimes, but over my career as a trial judge, I've presided over more than 100.
Right. And cases are heavily fact-specific, right?
That is true.
Did you remember all the facts of the case that Senator Hawley was?
I did not.
You did not, right. And the facts matter, right?
They do.
And as a judge, you're looking at all of the facts of the case, not just what might be talked about later or what people are honing in. You have to take everything into account and make a decision, correct?
Yes, that's what Congress has required judges to do.
Right. And just to clarify that Congress thing, because again, you went to this elite law school. I went to a gritty inner city law school, Yale. So you know this better than me, but it was actually 1984 that the sentencing laws, the sentencing standards were passed down, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, it was 1984. And then later in 2002 or 3, things were updated. But that 1984 was before the internet completely. And I just want to clarify also the Booker decision.
Yes.
Could you just clarify for the record, because my mom might be watching, no relation to me whatsoever, correct?
So the Booker decision, which earlier I mentioned that I thought Justice Scalia wrote it. In fact, it was Justice Stevens.
Yes.
But Justice Scalia concurred, so he had a separate opinion, and he had written a previous decision that was very similar.
Yes.
The Booker decision made the guidelines, the sentencing guidelines, advisory.
Why? Why would the Supreme Court, joined by some of the most conservative members, why would they do that?
Well, they determined that, in essence, the Booker, that if the guidelines were mandatory, that it would violate the right to a jury trial to have jurors decide every aspect of your sentencing.
Yeah,
So,
it's just sort of the separation of powers, Sixth Amendment.
yes,
This is really important.
yes,
And so that gave judges latitude.
yes.
Now, if you were falling out of the norm, and this is where, I've now read conservative periodicals looking at this line of attack that's not a negative pejorative. Again, my colleague himself used it, but this line of attack on you, I've seen conservative papers, liberal papers, mainstream papers, all say this doesn't hold water. And the reason is, and again, unlike White House and Cruz, I don't have a chart. I'm uncharted. But I would like to hold this up for you. You are well within the norm nationally for going below the sentencing guidelines because of this problem where you have this incongruency that judges on both sides of that have been pointed by people of both sides of the aisle have seen. I just want to make that very clear. You are well within the norm in the United States of America. I'm a former mayor, and one of my favorite mayor friends used to always say, "In God we trust, but everybody else bring me data." and so the data kind of shows that you're not some outlier. And forgive me, because you're not allowed to do this, but I kind of sat here and was a little insulted about the accusation that somehow this mother of two, confirmed 3 times by the United States Senate, who has victim advocacy groups writing letters for you, who has child victims advocacy groups supporting you, who has presided over fact-specific cases of the most heinous crimes, that somehow the implication that you are somehow out of the norm of other federal judges that we have confirmed where these issues have never come up, who, again, I held up this chart, but the majority of the decisions, a percentage of sentences below guideline range in non-production child pornography cases. In D.C., 80% of them are under the guidelines. In Missouri, 77%. In Iowa, 62%. In North Carolina, 77%. In Nebraska, 81%. And so on and so on and so forth, down to Utah, alphabetical order, 71%. And so this implication that somehow your thoughtfulness on these very dense, fact-specific cases is somehow out of the norm, to me, does not hold up, doesn't head water. And then you add that to the endorsements that you have gotten from folks that deal with victim advocacy groups. It is, to me, just a line of attack that it does not hold in no way for me. I'm sorry. In the totality of your career, what you've accomplished and what you've done. I just think it's unfortunate that, unlike the sort of fair arbiters of this on both sides of the aisle who've dismissed it, I appreciate the way you've sat there and addressed all of that stuff. And that really brings me to the larger implication. You talked a lot about your uncles, one of them served in Baltimore. Is that right? As a police officer?
My brother was a police officer in Baltimore.
The gentleman over there?
Yes.
Who volunteered to serve in the United States military?
Yes.
And you have talked about that police work, right?
Yes.
I live in Newark. I love my city. If you cut me, I bleed bricks. And I the nickname of our city is Brick City. Your brother and I probably understand something. The majority of murder victims in the United States of America, do you know who the majority of murder victims are?
I don't.
They're black men. I imagine in your conversations with your brother and your two uncles, you who patrolled some of these streets, I imagine you feel in a different way about the anguish of what many communities of color struggle with when it comes to crime. Am I right there?
You are right, Senator. It is very anguishing, and it is something that I know all too well.
And you are a person that has that same fear that many mothers have for their daughters who do go out in this world. My mom used to say, when you have a child, it's like your heart going around outside of your body all of a sudden. And I just find it hard to believe, given your law enforcement background, you're a mom, that you take any of this urgency to keep America safe. And then I see that, like, folks I know well. I've worked with the FOP. I began negotiating with them. I have to say, I thought Jim Pascoe, before I knew him, it's a whole thing, Brene Brown, bring people close. At first, I thought he was an ogre, biggest police union in the country. I had some tough negotiations with my police union. He and I sat down and we shared our stories. And I think we realized we were coming from the same place when we were working on police reform. FOP endorsed you, and they wrote a powerful letter. I won't read it again. The IACP, they represent the largest, that's the rank and file, the FOP. The IACP represents the bosses, the managers. They endorse you. There's another group that maybe my colleagues don't know as well as I do. It's called Noble. Do you know them?
I do.
They're the black law enforcement organization nationally. People like your brother.
Yes.
Who love their communities.
Yes.
Who have seen, like I have, too many young men lying with bullet holes, bleeding into our pavements. These are folks who come from communities like your brother knows, where you too often see sidewalk shrines to murdered youth. I've talked to the women and men of Noble so many times. Anybody ever accuse them of being soft on crime? But they understand the complicated factors of crime in our country. And what they have to say to you about you, I won't read it, is just beautiful. Law enforcement family, mother of two, law enforcement organization after law enforcement organization, victims advocacy organizations after victims advocacy organizations, Republican appointed judges, Democratic appointed judges. That's who's in your corner. We're politicians. We have a sworn oath right now. I've just watched you with dignity and grace field what I can only imagine is behind those questions, is this doubt that is being sown. I just want America to know that when it comes to my family's safety, when it comes to Newark, New Jersey, or my state, God, I trust you. I trust you. Now, I brought in your mother, and I have to go back there. My mom has a saying that is awfully embarrassing when she talks about me. She says, she'll introduce me, and she'll say, behind every successful child is an astonished parent. But there's something about your mother looking at her is that she doesn't seem all too astonished. She seems like almost just very slyly she knew that a day like this might come. And so I just want to share with you that I have done a lot of hiring before I was in a legislative body, I ran New Jersey's largest city. And I could write a book about all the management mistakes I made in my first year and how it made me a really good manager. And the first mistake I made was I was just looking for the most talented, credentialed, skillful, smart people to help me run things. And I soon learned it wasn't enough. I made some mistakes in hiring. And I began to see that those skills, which you have a tremendous amount of, it's been said so many times, if stacking you up against other Supreme Court justices, you have more qualifications, more credentials than many of them. But I learned that you should hire first, that's necessary credentials, but not sufficient, that you should hire for character. That's what made me hire a great team in Newark eventually. And we operated so well. And so I believe I've gotten to know your character over these weeks, but I want America to know a little bit more about your character right now. And so I know my values. Booker T. Washington said it. James Baldwin said it. Children are never good at listening to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them. If I want to know your character, you haven't let me do this yet, but I want to hang out with your parents a little bit. And so let's draw them into this conversation. We won't swear them under oath, but just could you share with me what are their bedrock values that are most a part of your values now that you hope and pray are your grandchildren's, unborn grandchildren's values? What are those most important values you inherited from those two folk over there?
Thank you, Senator. I inherited a number of bedrock values, as you say, from my extraordinary parents. As I mentioned, my parents grew up in a time in this country in which Black children and white children were not allowed to go to school together. They persevered. They were the first in their families to go to college, to have that chance. They each went to historically Black universities, and they taught me hard work. They taught me perseverance. They taught me that anything is possible in this great country. And I think it came, as I said in my introduction, from the sea change that we had in this country from the 1960s when Congress passed 2 civil rights acts and African Americans finally had the chance to become a part of the dream, become a part of the fabric of this wonderful nation. My parents moved to Washington, D.C. because this is where it all started for them in terms of having new freedoms. And I was born here on that hope and dream. I was born here with an African name that my parents gave me to demonstrate their pride in who they were and their pride and hope in what I could be.
And it seems to me, as a guy whose parents came here and you and I both were born here months apart, I would hear my parents' tough stories at the dinner table about facing bigotry. Here in the city, my father told me stories about his early jobs, but I never noticed a hint of bitterness or that hate he saw. Never generated hate with him. In fact, he just loved people, all people.
That is correct, Senator. And I would say that my wonderful parents went on to become extraordinary public servants. They had new opportunity. They could have done, other things, but each of them decided to give back to the community. My mother was in the public school system. She was a teacher and then became an administrator, became the principal of a magnet school for the arts in Miami, a new school that had started up, and became the sort of beloved principal of New World School of the Arts. And so many of her students continue to see me, meet me, and they know me for my mother, which is fantastic.
And she had diverse students.
She had extraordinarily
And she
diverse.
loved on all those children.
Everyone.
Black, white, Asian.
Everyone.
Well, let me ask you this, because I'm going to push you a little harder, because I have some people I really respect on the other side of the aisle, and they do. My friends and I talk about religion sometimes. Faith is important. I was teasing Lindsey, Senator Graham earlier, but I don't want to ask you anything specific about your faith except for this, because you brought it up in your opening statement, and I have to tell you, I don't think black women have any providence over struggle. People from all backgrounds in America struggle. But I do know often as the trailblazing black women, they have often faced many challenges being the first or being a trailblazer or breaking glass ceilings. But I know on your journey to this moment right now, you have faced very tough moments. Probably you've been knocked down by life. I always say if America hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. You've been heartbroken by something, circumstance. You've been like Zora Neale Hurston, who says, I've been through sorrow's kitchen and I licked out all the pots. You've been like Langston Hughes to that poem, Mother to Son, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Could you talk to me maybe about one moment or what you do when you get knocked down like that? Where do you get the grit and the guts to get back up and keep on going?
Well, Senator, I think that too is something that I learned from my grandparents, who, as I said, didn't have it easy. My grandparents, who didn't have a lot of formal education, but who were the hardest working people I've ever known, and who just got up every day and put one foot after the other and provided for their families and made sure that their children went to college, even though they never had those opportunities. I reflect on them in the context of this historic moment. I stand on the shoulders of people from that generation, and I focus at times on my faith when I'm going through hard times. Those are the kinds of things that I learned from my grandmother, who used to have those family dinners and bring us all together. And I think that's a common experience of Americans, that when you go through difficult times, you lean into family and you turn to faith. And that's part of my experience as well.
It's, I think, the experience of my colleagues and I on both sides of the aisle, leaning on that faith and that family. I want to give you, there's one thing about your opening statement, and I have to say, I haven't actually shaken your husband's hand yet, but yesterday I was mad at him because when he started tearing up at your remarks about him, it triggered, I don't really have it, but it triggered a sympathetic cry in me as well. So I'm a little upset at him, but I will deal with him individually. But you said something that I found provocative, to use that word one more time. And I felt afterwards, I reflected, I even talked to my staff about it, because I thought that statement, it didn't seem congruent to me. And it was, I don't know if it was a profession of humility or overly critical of yourself. But I want to end in my last 5 minutes giving you space to explain yourself to me, because much to my mom's chagrin, I am not a parent yet. And I'm looking at somebody that I admire. But you said something that struck me, because look, my mom was a working mom. And God, it was tough. My colleagues will not believe this, but there was a time I was very melodramatic, and I was in a bathtub of oatmeal bathtub, and my mom was getting ready to go on a business trip, and I look at her with these sad eyes, and I say, "Mom, if you leave me, I'll die." And she looked at me, knowing that you don't die from the chicken pox, but I still remember her going to the phone, having a long conversation, taking off her business suit and changing into her sweatpants. She would tell me later that was not a sign of love. She loved me, but a lot of women who love their kids can't stay home because we don't have paid family leave in this country. So you said in your opening remarks, that you haven't been as good of a parent, I think if I'm paraphrasing right, good as a mom as you'd like to be. And I looked at your two girls, and I look at you, and I don't understand that statement. Could you maybe explain for me what you meant, and maybe take one more beat and explain to me what it means to you to be a mom of two young women growing up in America today?
Thank you, Senator. What I said in my statement was that that I had struggled, like so many working moms, to juggle motherhood and career. And it takes a lot of hard work to become a judge, to do the work of a judge, which I've done now for almost 10 years. You have a lot of cases. You don't have all that many resources, comparatively speaking, and it's a lot of early mornings and late nights. And what that means is there will be hearings during your daughter's recitals. There'll be emergencies on birthdays that you have to handle. And I know so many young women in this country, especially who have small kids, who have these momentous events and have to make a choice. You talked about your mom making the choice to make sure that she cared for you in that moment. And there are times when obviously you have to care for your family members. There are other times when there are events that you wish you could be a part of, but here's the emergency case that you have to deal with. And so I said in my opening that girls, you've had to deal with me juggling motherhood and job responsibilities, and I didn't always get the balance right. And so I would hope for them seeing me, hopefully you all will confirm me, seeing me moved to the Supreme Court, that they can know that you don't have to be perfect in your career trajectory and you can still end up doing what you want to do, that you just have to understand that there are lots of responsibilities in the world and that you don't have to be a perfect mom, but if you do your best and you love your children, that things will turn out okay.
Well, I'm sure your mom probably feels she wasn't perfect, but things have turned out okay. And I will tell you this. I'm sure they've said it, and if they haven't, I'm sure they will. The older I get, the more I appreciate my parents. I know they're proud of you, but as a guy who does have faith, and I sit at home in a room of my ancestors where I have generations of my ancestors' pictures up, and they're black folk and white folk. I have a very interesting family tree. And I sit there to feel my ancestors sometimes and think about them. I hope right now, in this questions and blistering, that you know that at that desk there are a whole lot of spirits around you with their hands on you. Not only your children and your parents proud, but so are your ancestors. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Booker. And Judge Jackson, had a lot of politicians on this committee, 22 of them. There's only one Cory Booker. And when he does his cross-examination on the human side, I always wait to see, can the witness get through this without a little emotion? There was a little there, as there should have been, as he talked about your family and your parents and your children. Cory, you're one of a kind. We love you. We have three more to ask questions tonight. Senator Kennedy, Senator Padilla, Senator Blackburn. We're going to break for consent to enter a letter in the record from 9 former national security officials defending Judge Jackson's Guantanamo representation. The signatories include former Attorney General Loretta Lynch, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson, and the former Judge Advocate General of the United States Navy, Senator Booker.
Thank you very much, Judge. After me, only 5 to go. But sit back for a second, because I don't have questions right away. I actually have a number of things I just want to say, because this has been not a surprise, given the history that we all know, not a surprise, but perhaps a little bit of a disappointment, some of the things that have been said in this hearing. The way you have dealt with some of these things, that's why you are a judge and I am a politician, because you have sat with grit and grace and have shown us just extraordinary demeanor during the times where people were saying things to you that are actually out of the norm. I had to go up dais to ask some of my more senior colleagues about what I feel like is a dangerous precedent. People are taking 1,000 cases you've been over. Is that right? I'm sorry, I said you wouldn't ask you questions, but just give me
something like that.
Something like that. And from what I understand is that these cases often take days, weeks, sometimes months, right?
To decide in a case.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a trial sometimes, and folks are taking any of those cases and just trying to pick pieces out. And so my colleague, Senator Hawley, has been doing this all into the lead up and saying things, tweeting things that I think that a lot of us, when I was just trying to get some advice here, is this is what the new standard is going to be. That any judge coming before us that has ever chosen outside of the sentencing guidelines, below the sentencing guidelines, we're creating this environment now where I could make myself the hero of people who have been victims of some horrible crime and suddenly put whatever judge I want on the defensive by trying to drag out little bits when they have no context to the case. None of the facts. They're seeking to exploit the complexities of a criminal justice system, the reason why we have a third branch of government. I feel bad that there was a judge mentioned by name in this hearing that's from Senator Hawley's state. What is that judge going to think next time they have a complicated sexual abuse case that comes before them, and they know that they could possibly be called out if they go below the sentencing guidelines, which I showed you yesterday in my lack of chart. If you remember, I was uncharted. But that you are deciding completely in the norm. 70+% in many states of people are doing just like you did. But I'm a Democratic senator. I've never quoted from this very well-respected conservative periodical. This is the National Review. Very well-respected. They're not necessarily something I agree with all the time. But here's what the National Review, this is the title. Senator Hawley's disingenuous attack against Judge Jackson's record on child pornography. I'll just read the first paragraph. I would oppose Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson because of her judicial philosophy for the reasons I outlined last week. I addressed that in a separate post. For now, I want to discuss the claim by Senator Josh Hawley that Judge Jackson is appallingly soft on child pornography offenders. This is the kicker here. The allegations appear meritless to the point of demagoguery. I got letters from leaders of victims' rights groups, survivors of assault, all saying sort of the same thing with the National Review. Feel proud about yourself. You brought together right and left in this calling out of people that will sit up here and try to pull out from cases and try to put themselves in a position where they're the defenders of our children. To a person who has children, to a person whose family goes out in streets and defends children. I mean, this is a new low. And what's especially surprising about this is it didn't happen last year. You were put on a court that I'm told is considered like the second most powerful court in our land. And you were passed with bipartisan support. Nobody brought it up then. Did they not do their homework? Were they lax? Did they make a mistake? I wonder, as they ask you the question, do you regret? I wonder if they regret that they didn't bring that out. No. Why? Because it was an allegation that is meritless to the point of demagoguery. You are, I don't mean this in any way, because if anybody called me average, I would be upset, but you are a mainstream judge. Your sentencing, I've looked at the data, falls in the mainstream on everything from child sexual assault to all the other issues that people are trying to bring up. Some of these things that are being cast at you, that you called George Bush a war criminal, come on, that is painful. Especially because, as you said, the brief change, these are names that you have to put in. And we're talking about a real issue that goes to the core of our values, torture. Barack Obama was named once Bush left office. There is an absurdity to this that is, it is almost comical if it was not so dangerous. Because the next time a judge comes before us on the right or the left that has a body of work like you do, gosh, one of the some performance artists on our side could pull out one of the cases where they were below the sentencing guideline. Say, for example, it was on something like as horrific as rape that we all agree is horrific. And they can suddenly put themselves as the defense. How dare we put someone who's soft on crime? Well, are you soft on crime? God bless America. I got this great text. I've become really good friends with the folks at the FOP from my negotiations. And this was my favorite text. You all got to get this. I think my brother Kennedy might get a kick out of this. He goes, things that are uncountable, stars in the sky, grains of sand on the beach, and the number of times Democrats will mention that the FOP endorsed Judge Jackson in this hearing. But let me mention it again. Just in case my people say you're rough on crime folks really want to try to make that stick. You were endorsed by the largest organization of rank and file police officers. You were endorsed by the bosses, the largest organization of chiefs of police. And you were endorsed by Noble, who I hope people find out more about that organization. You got uncles that are officers. You got a brother, not just an officer, who went to serve after 9/11. Your family's not soft on terrorism. He went out there to capture and kill and defend this country from terrorists. I actually sitting back here and finding this astonishing, but then I do my homework. I love that my colleague brought up Constance Baker Motley. You know, when she was getting to the floor of the Senate, they were trying to stop her with outrageous accusations. You know what the accusation was back then? She was a communist. Dragging up stories, trying to throw anything that they might stick. But this is what you and I know. Any one of us senators could yell as loud as we want that Venus can't return a serve. We could yell as loud as we want that Beyonce can't sing. We could yell as much as we want that astronaut Mae Jemison didn't go all that high. But you know what? They got nothing to prove. As it says in the Bible, let the work I've done speak for me. Well, you have spoken. You started speaking as a little girl, watching that man right there try to raise a family and study law while your mama supported everybody. You spoke in high school when you started distinguishing yourself. And you know what you said when they told you you couldn't go to Harvard? Watch me. I went to law school. I didn't serve on the law review. You did. I didn't clerk at every level of the federal court. You clerked for a Supreme Court justice, one widely respected on both sides, which really shaped you. You left there and you went to private practice, and you know what you found? This is what you told me. That you had those tough choices that working moms have to make, the demands of a private law firm, raising your kids. It just didn't add up. You went before this Senate 3 times in a bipartisan manner. God bless America. We don't do that much stuff bipartisan around here. You went to become a public defender because you wanted to understand all aspects of the law. Who does that? We live in a society that's very materialistic sometimes, very, very consumeristic. You went into, do people become public defenders for the money? No. Your family and you speak to service, service, service. And I'm telling you right now, I'm not letting anybody in the Senate steal my joy. I told you this at the beginning. I'm embarrassed. It happened earlier today. I just look at you and I start getting full of emotion. I'm jogging this morning, and I'm at the end of the block I live on. And I get terrified because I put my music on loud when I'm jogging, trying to block out the noise of the heart attack I'm having. And this woman comes up on me, practically tackles me, an African-American woman. And the look on her eyes, she just wanted to touch me because I'm sitting so close to you, and tell me what it meant to her to watch you sitting where you're sitting. And you did not get there because of some left-wing agenda. You didn't get here because of some dark money groups. You got here how every black woman in America who's gotten anywhere has done, by being like Ginger Rogers said, I did everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards in heels. And so I'm just sitting here saying, nobody's stealing my joy. Nobody's going to make me angry, especially not people that are called in a conservative magazine demagogic for what they're bringing up that just doesn't hold water. I'm not going to let my joy be stolen because I know you and we appreciate something that we get that a lot of my colleagues don't. I know Tim Scott does. When I first came to this place, I was the 4th black person ever popularly elected to the United States Senate. And I still remember a lot of mixed people, white folks, black folks work here, but at night when people are in line to come in to clean this place, the percentage of minorities shift a lot. And so I'm walking here, first week I'm here, and somebody who's been here for decades doing the urgent work of the Senate, but it's the unglamorous work that goes on no matter who's in offices. The guy comes up to me, all he wants to say, I can tell, is, I'm so happy you're here. But he comes up and he can't get the words out. And this man, my elder, starts crying. And I just hugged him. And he just kept telling me, it is so good to see you here. It's so good to see you here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love my brother, Tim Scott. We could write a dissertation on our disagreements. He gave the best speech on race. I wish I could have given good of a speech. But talking to the challenges and indignities that are still faced. And you're here. I was in the White House with my Democratic colleagues, and I'm in my joy. I can't help it. and the president's asking our advice, who should we nominate and whatever. And I look at Kamala and we have a knowing glance, which we've had for years when she and I used to sit on this end of this committee at times. And then I try to get out to the president what it means. What it means. And I want to tell you, when I look at you, this is why I get emotional. I'm sorry, you're a person that is so much more than your race and gender. You're a Christian, you're a mom, you're an intellect, you love books, but for me, I'm sorry, it's hard for me not to look at you and not see my mom, not to see my cousins, one of them who had to come here and sit behind you. She had to have your back. I see my ancestors and yours. Nobody's going to steal the joy of that woman in the street or the calls that I'm getting or the texts. Nobody's going to steal that joy. You have earned this spot. You are worthy. You are a great American. Your hero is Constance Baker Motley. Mine, she has sat on my desk for my offices that I've held. She's my icon of America. Her name is Harriet Tubman. There is a love in this country that is extraordinary. You admitted it about your parents. They loved this nation, even though there were laws preventing them from getting together. When they were loving, there were laws in this country that would have prevented you from marrying your husband. It wasn't that long ago, it was last generation. But they didn't stop loving this country, even though this country didn't love them back. And what were the words of your heroes and mine? What did Constance Baker Motley do? Did this country that she saw insults and injuries, when she came out of law school, law firms wouldn't even hire her because she was a woman. Did she become bitter? Did she try to create a revolution? No, she used the very constitution of this nation. She loved it so much, she wanted America to be America. As Langston Hughes wrote, "Oh, let America be America again. The land that never has been yet, but yet must be the land where everyone is free." Oh, yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, but I swear this oath, America will be. That is the story of how you got to this desk, you and I and everyone here, generations of folk who came here and said, America, I'm Irish. You may say, no, Irish or dogs need to fly, but I'm going to show this country that I can be free here. I can make this country love me as much as I love it. Chinese Americans first forced into near slave labor, building our railroads, connecting our country, saw the ugliest of America, but they were going to build their home here and say, America, you may not love me yet, but I'm going to make this nation live up to its promise and hope. LGBTQ Americans, from Stonewall women to Seneca, hidden figures who didn't even get their play until some Hollywood movie finally talked about them and how they were critical for us defying gravity. All of these people loved America. And so you faced insults here that were shocking to me. Well, actually not shocking. But you are here because of that kind of love. And nobody's taken this away from me. So you got 5 more folk to go through. 5 more of us. And then you can sit back and let us have all the debates. And I'm going to tell you, it's going to be a well-charted Senate floor because it's not going to stop. They're going to accuse you of this and that. Heck, in honor of your person who shares your birthday, you might be called a communist. But don't worry, my sister. Don't worry. God has got you. And how do I know that? Because you're here. And I know what it's taken for you to sit in that seat. Harriet Tubman is one of my heroes because the more I read about this person, the more, she was viciously beaten. For her whole life, she used to fall into spells, cracked skull. She faced starvation, chased by dogs. And when she got to freedom, what did she do? Did she rest? No, she went back. Again and again and again. The sky was full of stars. But she found one that was a harbinger of hope for better days, not just for her and those people that were enslaved, but a harbinger of hope for this country. And she never gave up on America. She fought led troops in the Civil War. She was involved in the suffrage movement. And as I came back from my run, after being near assaulted by someone on the street, I thought about her and how she looked up. She kept looking up. No matter what they did to her, she never stopped looking up. And that star, it was a harbinger of hope. Today, you're my star. You are my harbinger of hope. This country is getting better and better and better. And when that final vote happens and you ascend onto the highest court in the land, I'm going to rejoice. And I'm going to tell you right now, the greatest country in the world, the United States of America, will be better because of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Booker. We're going to take a 10-minute break.
Thank you.
And come back and have the last 5 senators ask their questions.
Criminal law. But I've now asked a lot of prosecutors trying to be fair about this, and some of them served on this committee, to understand. And the kind of confidential information, I thought, well, maybe you could redact it. And people were saying to me, no, you cannot even redact it. There is so much compromising confidential information that none of us would want out there. And Senator, who I have a lot of respect for, and have actually thought a lot of her questions during this were thoughtful and probing and helped me, frankly. But she's new on the committee, but I know this. I've also asked this question. This is a body, this Judiciary Committee, that has, for Republican and Democratic presidents, done, am I fair to say, thousands of judges have been put onto federal benches. And this is a new territory. We have never asked for this kind of confidential information from a third branch of government. It's just never been done. And when you cross a precedent like this, now I've seen this having been 8 years in the Senate, what you're going to create now, first of all, this information should never be released to politicians, in my opinion. There's nothing additive to it. But what you do when you cross that line is now you're going to create a new precedent. So some performative Democrat, when there's a Republican judge coming before us, is going to demand the same information and use it or exploit it for political purposes. I don't think we want to cross that line in this body where this has never come up in the 200 years. I don't know how long this information has been collected in this manner. It just seems like a really large step that I don't think, as you said yesterday, it's going to change the conclusions that have already been drawn by people on either side of the aisle. If there's somebody who just wants to come forward and say, I'm on the fence on how I'm going to vote, this is the determinative thing, I just don't hear that. And the danger weighing these, the danger is really, in terms of changing the way this committee operates, impeding upon issues of privacy, I think the danger way outweighs any probative value.
I can't imagine for a moment a parent who has been somehow related to a child exploited in this circumstance, who lives in fear every day of what's going to be made public, what's going to show up on